Now, many times you're not going to be able to do batch processing just using an HQL statement. There's going to be times where you're going to need to execute some logic in your code to determine how to update a particular entity or what to do. In those cases, when you're working with a very large set of data, you're going to have to implement batch processing in somewhat of a manual way. So I'm going to show you an example here of using update. I've already coded up this example to save us some time since we're going to be covering a lot in this module. What I've basically done is I've started in my Hibernate config and I've set this hibernate.jdbc.batch size. I've set this to 20. You can set this to whatever is a reasonable amount. We don't have that many users in our database in our dummy data, so it's not going to matter that much, but you do need to set this to something so that it will be able to batch up the data into these chunks. Next, inside of our main program, what I've done here is I'm using this create criteria that we had before to get all the users, but I'm doing something special here. Normally we were using list, but this time I'm using scroll. And what I've done is I've basically set the cache mode to cache ignore to make sure that we're not using that secondary level cache, because obviously when we're batching things up, we don't want to be hitting the cache. That's going to be really expensive. We're trying to avoid the cache. So by setting this cache mode ignore and then calling scroll, what I'm doing is I'm basically using a cursor in the database. This means that I'm going to be getting the data from the database as I ask for it, as opposed to getting a big, large set of data at once. And this is important. If you had hundreds of thousands of users, you might not have the memory to load them all up at once. So you're going to want to get them as you ask for them. So that's all this scroll is doing. And then we're setting up a count so we know how many users we've gotten. And then we're just setting up this while loop. As long as users next, we have this scrollable results, and it's going to continue to return true as long as there's a next piece of data to get. Then we're going through each user. We're going to get that user. And then we're going to just set up some new protein data. This could represent whatever change you're doing to that particular entity. And then I'm going to go ahead and save that entity. And then I've set this up so that we're incrementing our count, and every second user, we're going to go ahead and do a flush and a clear on the session. This is what's actually going to batch this up and send that data. Now remember, normally Hibernate would wait. It would store this stuff in the first level cache, and it would wait until we committed our transaction to execute all of that SQL. But by doing a flush and a clear, we basically tell Hibernate, hey, go ahead and send what you have now, and it's going to obey this batch size to determine how much data it should send at one given time. So we're still going to print out the name, so we'll be able to tell what's going on here, and then we're still going to do our commit and then our close. So let's go ahead and run this code. And you can see the batching here by looking at where the names are. It's a little bit hard to read all of this that's going on because Hibernate's generating lots of different queries for our data. But you can see that we have Joe, and then we've got a few queries that were executed, and then Bob, and then Amy. So our batching was happening here. We ended up sending up this data. We have these extra inserts and updates. Then we have selects happening here with Bob, and then after Amy, then we do an insert and update again. And you can really see the difference here if I were to change this. So for example, if I change this to everyone, so every single user, it's going to be sending that data up. It's not going to wait. Then if we run this, you'll notice that it's going to look a little bit different, this pattern. You can see the Joe, the Bob, the Amy. We don't have these big chunks in between here. We've got everything pretty much the same. And if I were to change this again, let's say we made the batch size so that it's only going to do it every 10th. So it's actually not going to send any data early. It's never going to hit this flush or clear. In our case, you can see again the difference in this data. We've got Joe, Bob, Amy, and then all of this happens at the very end. And you could do a very similar thing with inserts if you were inserting data, but most often this is going to be used when you're doing some kind of an update, and you just want to make sure a couple of things. Like I said, you don't want to have the cache. You want to use scroll so you're not pulling down too much data at one time. And then by doing this session flush and clear, that's how you're basically chopping things up to send them in batches.